Hello, everyone. Good evening. You're listening to Heart with Saima, the podcast show searching for that courageous person within us who wants to be inspired by listening to stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm Saima Dillon, your host. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. And without waiting anymore, let's dive right in and bring Ashok and Nancy on. And good evening, my dear friends. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm tired. I'm tired. That's the
I'm freezing cold. It's in Canada, and we just are in the middle of the winter freeze.
Well, you know what? I mean, we have had some great weather here in Dallas. Uh,
Yes.
I think a cold front came on the 1st of January. So it's been like in 20s and 30s. But otherwise, Christmas was literally, I think, 85 degrees. So we're really spoiled, have a difficult time handling the cold.
Well, I don't get to complain because I'm in Los Angeles, but I have to say it was okay. And I know I feel like I have to defend where I live and defend myself a little bit here because yes, just a sec. It was like 44 degrees this morning when I woke up, but there's no insulation in Southern California homes. So it's only a little bit warmer inside than it is outside. So it's
Mm.
colder than it sounds. And most of our buildings are that way. I know I grew up in New York and you only had to brave to the car as long as the car was warmed up, right? And then once you got inside, it was peeling off layers and layers and layers because you were dying. It was so warm. Here, it's like I go to work and all the layers have to stay on and the space heater goes on and now I've got gloves on and a beanie and I'm sitting in my office like this. But thankfully, uh, Southern California balances out our weathers with some really beautiful, unexpected 80-degree days in the middle of winter. So
I'm sure they'll come. So I thought, and I had talked to Ashok about this before. I was like, Ashok, let's talk about PTSD. And Ashok said that we should talk about this when Nancy is here. So Nancy, diving right in, and we would love for you to share your experience and you suffering from PTSD and your discovery and how it changed your life, whatever you'd like to share about post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes, and I would say I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. In order to understand some of this, I am going to briefly let everyone know my story, and I will preface that as I always do by letting people know, like, it's not easy to hear. Receive it how you receive it. There's no judgment on my part on how you react or feel about it whatsoever. If you're feeling it, I've probably felt it myself. But, my trauma started very early. I was 4 or 5 years old and I was sexually abused by my grandfather. And that went on until I was 16 years old. And at that time, I didn't know there were laws and I didn't know anything about mandated reporters, but that's how my story came out. It was really against my will. I had carefully guarded the secret because it felt like my life depended on it. And here it was like literally unleashed everywhere and I had no control anymore. And so, there was the trauma of what had gone on for years, the trauma of how it came out, the trauma of moving through it, and, had other things that happened along the way. I developed an eating disorder after I confronted my grandfather when I was 20 years old. I was anorexic for years. It was a combination of, yes, control, but hated my body. It had betrayed me. It was wanting to disappear. So there were so many things going on. And honestly, one of the major PTSD symptoms that I carried with me for so long that kept me from knowing actually how impacted I was that numbness, that living in a fishbowl. Like the whole world was happening around me. I could see it. It was in color. I could see why people would be happy. I just couldn't feel it. And so for me, at a young age, my little 5-year-old, bless her, was brilliant. And she figured out a way to survive. And she figured out, well, if I'm not in this body, when these things happen, I don't have to experience it. And I can take these feelings that I don't like and I can lock them away. Unfortunately, while it was a brilliant system of survival, it's not a brilliant system to live by. because if you don't feel the bad, you don't get a choice of which emotions to lock away. You either feel it all or you feel none of it. And so I went through a lot of therapy, figuring out what it was actually that I was experiencing. I had no idea for a long time. It's one of the reasons bless you, one of the reasons I was, quote unquote, it was easy to be anorexic. My body might have been telling me it was hungry. I never felt it. I never connected to my body. It wasn't something that my body wasn't a place I lived in. And so I had a lot of, the symptoms. I had an exaggerated, and still have to some extent, an exaggerated startle reflex. One of the places that my brain is still taking care of me is in my sleep. I'm not a great sleeper. I don't really get that good, deep restorative sleep because there's always a part of me that's sort of waiting and paying attention. And there are the depression, mood. I struggle with my depression. I struggle with my mood on a daily basis. I've said before, I never thought I'd get over the abuse and the connection with my body and having a healthy relationship to sex. I never thought that I would ever enjoy food, or, be able to eat as something that was pleasurable and nourishing for my body. And yet those things are not what impact me on the daily. What impacts me on the daily is my mood. And that is, again, and Ashok, you are the expert here, but brain changes, chemistry changes over time, long-term trauma. And those are just some of the things that I understand to be true about what I've been through. They're not fun. I am very hard to medicate. I've tried medication. I have taken medication, but it's really difficult. And I think the scientific community and the community at large is now understanding that treating post-traumatic stress depression is very different from treating, what we had always thought of as typical depression. But I will say I find a lot of healing every day when I share my story. I find a lot of purpose in what I'm doing. I've always known that my story was bigger than me. Like, it didn't happen to me and it wasn't about me. It was always bigger than that. And it wasn't until about a year ago now, a little bit over a year ago, that I actually started sharing my story like publicly. It wasn't that I didn't talk about my story. If we knew one another and it came up in conversation or I brought it was fine. But I publicly disclosed, I took my mask off and I committed to being 100% me, 100% of the time, that realness. And it's been extraordinary for me. It's changed my life. It's changed my energy. It's changed my path and my purpose. But what really for me is so healing is knowing that it's changed other people's lives. My being able to, I don't know why my 5-year-old was so brilliant. And then my 6, 7, 8-year-old so smart, that knew what to do to get me through that. And that was her job. And she took it so seriously and got me to a point where I could say, thank you. Now we're going to retire these maladaptive behaviors and we're going to find some better ones to move forward with. But that did happen. And I got through it. And I got through it without falling to a lot of the pitfalls, I will say. I was not promiscuous. I didn't fall into drugs. I didn't abuse alcohol. There are so many men and women who, in the process of either they don't get to the process of healing, the journey of healing, or in the process of healing, just really find other ways to self-medicate the pain. And I didn't. So I knew coming out the other end as a whole person, as someone who could have a voice about it. Like I didn't think there was anything extraordinary about my story. I lived it. So it was always my normal. But what I've come to learn, what's extraordinary about me, my story, is really that I am able to tell my story. And I do that for people who do not yet have that voice, and to let them know. Because when I was in the middle of it, man, oh man, it was ugly, unsexy, snotty. And I was convinced for years of my life that I was broken beyond repair. Truly.
So Nancy, did you actually feel that something was wrong and that you were broken beyond repair?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I felt like, I was different from everyone else, and I could fake on the outside looking the same, but I was certain that what I was feeling on the inside was very different. Now, it probably was from a lot of my peers, but it's not very different from other people who have experienced trauma, especially sexual trauma. I just didn't know that at the time. Again, another reason I speak about it. There are some hard truths about sexual abuse, and my body is built perfectly. And so sexual touch equaled pleasure. Well, what a confusing thing to experience, especially at a young age. My body's broken. It betrayed me. And then honestly, when I became an adult and started entering into consensual adult relationships, my body betrayed me again because I couldn't feel anything. I wasn't attached to my body. I didn't know my body at all. And saying that out loud to people who haven't been there, I'm sure it's a cringeworthy moment of hearing it, but there's someone out there that was like me, who's been in this situation, is out there thinking they're broken beyond repair. This is that's only them. It's never going to get better. I always make sure I tell everyone, and I'm sure my mom and dad are very proud, I have a healthy relationship with sex. Because as a young woman, that was a big fear of mine, right? That like, I'm going to go my whole life and be disgusted by or unable to, or whatever the thoughts were as I went through the motions. And that's what I was doing. I was going through the motions because I wanted to look normal and I wanted to be normal. But yeah, I felt I was broken. And I felt mentally I was broken, that I would never be able to see the world the way other people did, or see the world in an unjaded way, or experience that happiness, that freedom, that the ability to not walk around heavy all the time, to not be guarding something all the time that people would find out about me and would change everything, right? It changed so much in my world when it came out the first time, but it's also this fear of, people, if they find out the truth about me, that they'll be disgusted, they'll blame me, they'll run away. I am so fortunate that has not been my experience. But I know there are many men and women who are doubted, who are told to shut up, who are told to never mention it again, and all sorts of horrible things. I, again, so fortunate to have the journey I've had, but broken beyond repair was my belief. Now, I didn't have true suicidal ideation, but I would go to bed, thinking to the universe, like, somebody's going to get a terminal cancer diagnosis tomorrow with a family and a life that they want to live. Give it to me. Because I was okay with dying. If there was a car accident that I passed on the freeway, it was like in the universe, thank the universe for keeping whoever was there hopefully safe, but then saying, could have been me. It would have been okay if it was me. So there are on a lot of levels, my interpersonal relationship. It's just such a pervasive. I can't even come up with one word for it, because it's the whole combination of everything that goes on is so pervasive, and for me so ingrained. It was years and years and years of my life. I didn't know how to be any different. I recently, in the last couple of years, I actually remember going into my therapist's office and sort of being like, I think I'm okay. And it was like, I kind of wanted to whisper it so the universe didn't hear, but also like I had realized I didn't know how to live okay. Like I had always lived with this high level of chaos going on in the background, and sometimes in the foreground, but I had lived with it for so long that was normal. And this state of quiet and peace and calm took some getting used to. Now I love it, and I'm blessed to have found it, but it was weird at first and really uncomfortable. And I'm going to be quiet for a minute here, because I know that both of you have wisdom to share, and I'm more than happy to come back to my story. But
No, I'm perfectly fine, because I'm learning. I mean, I'm your experience and your trauma, and I will let Ashok share his experience and perspective.
Thank you. And Nancy, thank you so much for sharing that story in the way that you did, because I've been a psychiatrist for a painfully long time. And when I started out, complex PTSD didn't exist.
no.
And I knew it did even when I was a student, and I was trying to tell my supervisors, there's more to this story. So I just want to very briefly just explain to the audience what the difference between complex and straightforward post-traumatic stress disorder. Using this, this is my Christmas tree from this year. And if you can see, the tree has rings in it. And all those rings represent every year of that tree's life. Now, if something happened to this tree in this ring here, it's going to affect the whole tree. But let's say something happens in this ring, this ring, this ring, and this ring, and this ring. more than one ring of that tree is going to have a much more profound effect, especially when someone is growing up. We assume that childhood is a smooth transition into teenage years and adulthood, but if something's happening repetitively to a person that is traumatic, especially if it's shame-based trauma, they're not going to develop the same way. Now, Nancy said a couple of things, but I want to say a few things about PTSD from my perspective. And this may sound a little sort of not what you read in the books, but I see PTSD essentially as a memory disorder and an empathy disorder. And let me explain what I mean by that. When a trauma happens to us, like if you go to a restaurant and you get food poisoned, the natural reflex is to remember that. And every time you go back to that restaurant and people say, hey, let's go here, you get sick and you avoid it. So our brains are designed to remember something so we can avoid it. Now think about that. If someone has a trauma, especially as a kid, they're trying to remember something at the same time they're trying to avoid it. They're trying to remember it and avoid it so that they can figure out how to cope with it. And as what Nancy said, this is probably one of the more common symptoms is numbness. And people get numbness because they're trying to distance themselves from the memory of that experience. But at the same time, they get hyper alertness and dreams and flashbacks because they're trying to remember it so they can know what to avoid. This creates chaos in a developing mind. At the same time, you're still trying to grow like this tree. And so when this happens, and this tree just keeps growing in this very lopsided way, and you're looking at somebody, you may have no idea why they're experiencing anxiety and depression and shame-based alienation. So that's the memory part. Let me very quickly go to the empathy part. And this is something I've actually sort of been thinking about more recently. This is not a very common perception. But it's not that people who've been traumatized have trouble empathizing with others. They don't believe some will be able to empathize with them. And so they hide, they lie, they don't tell the truth. They don't tell themselves the truth because they think there's no, I can't curse on the show, but there's no way that someone will understand or experience or believe what happened to me. And so that's why we see so many other behaviors coming in, that some of them are designed to actually be decoys. We don't see or guess that that's what's happening to that person. Like a kid who's got an eating disorder who suddenly learns how to cook and they're cooking for the whole family. They're getting straight A's in school. They're the head cheerleader and everyone says, wow. And you find out 10 years later that they've been abused their whole childhood. This is very common. So the idea of the empathy issue is that they don't believe someone will be able to empathize with them. And when I get a client in my office and I discover a history of trauma, sometimes 40 or 50 years later after the trauma, they're shocked that they finally have a place they can begin to tell the story and they're not going to disappear. I'll just leave it there for now.
Well, it's funny because I talk about therapy a lot. It's a tool for me that was transformative, and I am fortunate that my family was able to provide that for me. And I talk about the first therapist that I saw. And how do you know you found your therapist? Well, Suzanne Kilduff was my therapist, and I was in a place where I had one set. I can't remember how many sessions it was. Had been in therapy before. It was court ordered. And it was not very productive, to say the least. I was not ready. It was a man. It just was. It was not a good fit. But what he did tell my parents is when I was ready, I would knock on someone's door. I want to just stop for a second, Denise. I am so proud of you. Because I don't know if you guys saw in the platform, she said, I picked because I haven't dealt with it. I'm almost 50. And then revealed that she's never shared this on this type of platform before. And then I saw, holy shit, what did I just do? You just made the biggest leap in your healing journey that you could have ever made. You just honored yourself in such a beautiful way, Denise. You have given voice to your story, and that is a powerful story that will help others. You have shown up for yourself in a way that you, hang on, the cat is pressing things, in ways that you haven't been feeling you could do before. You found your voice. So bravo to you. I'm so proud of you. I've had this moment. I am with you. I am sending light and love and just letting you know that nothing changed. Nothing changed. You are the same beautiful woman I knew 10 minutes ago. So I think that's important because I was always worried when I would tell people that something they would change how they thought of me, or like I said earlier. But I'm so incredibly proud of you, Denise. So, okay, so therapy, right? I go to therapy for the first time. I'm 17 years old. I'm in high school. It's someone that I sought out. And I recognized that this game I was playing of pretend was really not sustainable past a certain point. And I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know that I wanted to do anything about it because I knew what the work looked like or had an idea. I just knew it wasn't sustainable. And what ended up happening was, honestly, I couldn't look this therapist in the eye and say anything. I couldn't have said elbow. And I don't know how I got there, but I know that what happened was I pulled the couch away from the wall and for many sessions sat behind the couch, between the couch and the wall, because it wasn't enough for me to not look at her. I couldn't tolerate her looking at me. And I very much felt that even though I was paying her, there was a chance at any moment she would go running out the door. And so I think it is really important that it's, we find that space where we can tell our truth and be seen and unconditionally accepted and unconditionally loved. And it's part of the Radiating Real movement that I created. Was important that people had that space. Ashok, go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt you. You're saying golden words to me, but I want to point out something, and you made it so eloquently visible to us. A lot of trauma survivors feel invisible, and they believe they are. And when they come into a session, for example, a therapy session, and what you said is so resonating with so many people I've worked with over the years, is they begin to appear. And the first person they have to appear for, even though it might be their therapist, is for themselves. Because now they're telling their story and telling it to somebody else, and it makes it real. Because for such a long time, it felt like it was kind of over there. I was in the room, but I was up in the corner of the room kind of thing. Now it's becoming real. They have to begin to deal with it from an emotional point of view. They have to go through the shame and the victimhood of it as well. All that self-forgiveness stuff that hopefully can begin to happen. And the other thing that too, and I don't want to swamp the audience with data here, but we all think that we're integrated. But when someone's been traumatized in childhood, they're disintegrated. Imagine a tree that is now just splinters everywhere. And they're trying to keep their splinters together and they lose them all the time. It's very hard to go around in life thinking that there's so much that you have to just to keep together. And when you finally sit in front of someone and you begin to become visible to yourself, the first reaction is often dread. And I often get people who have trouble coming back for the second or third session because they just told me too much the first session. And I got into the habit of saying at the end of the first, or usually what I call the reveal session, just send me an email when you're ready to come back. There'll be an appointment ready for you. But just take some time for this to soak in and see if you're ready. And that worked like magic because they didn't feel like the pressure to come back for the appointment. Mm-hmm. They felt that they were having a choice. Because what many victims, especially of shame-based sexual trauma in childhood, is they've had that choice taken from them. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, a lot of my childhood was being invisible by being seen in a certain way. Like you said, I raised my hand. I was captain of the volleyball team, president of my class. I was in the right crowd.
Right.
There was no reason to look at me twice. I was the ideal, right? The epitome of what you would want your child to look like and be achieving. And I looked happy on the outside. But all of that was to remain invisible.
They call that hiding in plain view.
Yes. Well, I was Oscar worthy in my performance. So that was it's a big deal. And so, yes, therapy and to just add to what you were saying before I move on, there are people in my life who I did not therapists, told parts of my story to, and it was very hard to then face them again. There are friendships, and I think it happens not just about this type of trauma, but anything. I know friends that have revealed things about their marriage, and then it feels weird because and they just sort of don't want to be faced with that. And it's not that I would ever say anything or anybody else would ever say anything back to me. It just became that person was the reflection because I knew they knew.
But I think, just to interrupt gently here, I think there's another issue here with that. And I was just watching Tim Sohn's show with Cara as well, and they're talking about cancer. And I think that when people have something that happens to them that is really egregious, it's kind of like a part of that person might be dead. And when someone's been traumatized in childhood, a part of them, I'm not saying that they're dead, but they feel that they a little bit are. And when they finally reveal that to somebody else, it's not that dissimilar to someone telling their friends they have cancer, and some of them show up and some of them disappear.
Yeah. It's, again, complex is the right word in front of post-traumatic stress disorder, especially for my experience. It's so layered. So much was going on for me, and a lot of the time I didn't know. And as I went through the process, I discovered more things, and I kept rolling up my sleeves. And there were days that I had tantrums. It's not fair. It's not my fault. Everybody tells me it's not my fault, yet I'm sitting here with the lap full of shit. Sorry, Saima. Even after I confronted my grandfather, that was my first major depressive episode, because I was ready to. I don't remember being a part of my childhood either, Denise. I'm glad you brought that up. I have a lot of third-person memories from pictures of childhood, and even to this day, my memory is not good. So I want to validate that for you, Denise, and it's different for everyone. But I totally forgot what I was saying before that. So if anyone was listening to me and remembers, that I confronted my grandfather. Bless you, Saima. I confronted my grandfather, and several things happened. One was he took responsibility for one incident, where he had been inappropriate, and it was something I didn't remember. So there was a cascade from that of what don't I remember? What happened to me? Do I need to remember all of this in order to get well? Can I handle knowing all? Like, there was this whole thing that happened. And then on top of all of that in my head, and the weight of this, and wonder and dread of what was coming, he had taken responsibility, and it changed nothing for me. So you go through this process in therapy where you get to a point where, okay, it wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. But the world scale of fairness can't fix the fact, right, that despite the fact that I did nothing wrong, I'm still the one who has to roll up my sleeves and go as many rounds as it takes to get my life back. And that was one of the things that popped into my head after I confronted him. And I mean, I dropped out of school. It took me years to say I dropped out of school instead of left, but I dropped out of school. I went home, was living with my parents in therapy 3 times a week, 1 time a week in group. That was my life for a while. And at some point it occurred to me, I don't want to give this man another minute of my life. I have every reason. I am completely justified in being who I am and how I am, right? This trauma, it all makes sense. Well, I could keep living my life that way, which was angry and bitter and closed off from the world, or I could roll up my sleeves and do this work that shouldn't have been mine to do, but was. As an adult, I didn't want to move forward and keep blaming this man and give him any more of my life for how I was living.
So I just want to explain that one psychiatric phenomena that we talk about is called projective identification. And I'm going to simplify that. A projection is when someone takes a part of themselves and projects it on somebody else. And an identification is when somebody accepts that projection. Now, when an adult is deciding to abuse a child, sadly and tragically, they give the child the shame that they're not feeling for what they're doing. And even more tragically, the child takes that shame, especially if the child is a child, and that their mind is accepting that shame. And when they grow up with that shame entrenched in their soul, like in one of these early rings of this tree, they don't know how to think or feel any other way. That's just part of who they are. And even when they might try something to confront or restore restorative justice with an abuser, it doesn't fix what happened to them when they were a kid. And it can take a long time to begin to really bring the inner self together to feel forgiveness and integration on the inside. I just want to put that point in there.
No, I appreciate that, and I think you and I have talked about this, not on show, but about how, because it went on till I was 16, because I never said no, because I knew it was wrong, because I let it happen, right? I felt one of the reasons I didn't want to disclose is I felt that I was as much to blame as he was, which is
Right.
exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
I
that's exactly
I
what I'm
didn't
talking
stop
about.
it, so I participated in it. Somehow it became like that I was actively choosing it because I didn't say no and I didn't stop it. And I think that's not, like you're saying, I don't think that's unusual. And I think it is a big barrier for a lot of people, because, again, part of why I thought people would judge me was because I was judging myself. I thought I was to blame. I thought I had participated. I thought I deserved all this, right? And that's how people were going to look at me because of what I'd been experiencing as a child and the beliefs I had then, but then because it went on for so long. And again, I added on to that, well, I knew this was wrong. And, and yet I was paralyzed to do anything. So yeah, it's interesting. And it has been a journey of discovery. And I continue to discover every day. And like I said, my mood is a huge piece for me and keeping track of that and balancing that. And it's not always easy. We said when we were in the green room, like Ashok was complimenting me, thank you very graciously, about how no matter how bad things got in this last year, I kept showing up. And it was sometimes horizontal in my bed because I couldn't get out of bed that day. But to me, it's just so important. It's paramount that we talk about that ugly middle, that ugly, unsexy, snotty middle. Because if I would have seen me today on this show as my 20-year-old self, I would have said, you don't understand. Look at you. You're out there. You're doing great. You have your life. You've got your career. You're smiling. You've got your life is perfect. How could you possibly understand where I am now? Because we tend to see people at the end of their story, or at least the part of their story that they're willing to reveal themselves in, without knowing what happened in the middle, where all that yuck is. All that yuck that gets hidden. And so for me, it's super important. It is, again, I said paramount that I show you the ugly.
I want to make another point about weak and strong. And we like to think that we're strong. We like to think that we can survive. We like to think that if we've been victimized by something, that we can overpower that. And it's one of the impediments to facing the essential helplessness of being a child who's being abused, where you weren't bigger than your abuser. You weren't able to know how this was going to affect you for the rest of your entire life. You weren't able to tell anyone about it because you'd get in trouble and your family would be destroyed, at least in your mind at that time. And so being strong becomes a way of telling yourself that I'll just be strong, I'll be strong, I'll be strong. And then finally one day you have to realize, wait a minute, how could I have been strong with these insurmountable forces that I was dealing as a child? And so this need to be strong, and this admission that in that moment I was a victim. It's a very tough thing for people to kind of accept sometimes and move forward to work on that important self-forgiveness work on the inside.
Yeah, and I went from victim to survivor to thriver. And for me, that was an important transition, because even as a survivor, I was this, like you said, strong, bring it, bring anything you want. I've got this. And I walked around in the world with this. This is what people felt from me. I talk about Raquel Boris all the time, who's one of my best friends in this whole world, who was intimidated by me when she met me, which is bizarre to me to even think about me being intimidating. But I was at that time walking around with come on, test me.
How do you change that, Nancy? How do you change that attitude of, because I feel that when you have that attitude where you say, okay, you know what do you have in store for me? Bring it on. I just feel the universe sends all these difficulties and hardships and struggle your way because that's what your energy is saying to the world. Did you feel that way? Is that
Yes, I think I took those challenges on as challenges to keep showing myself I was okay. But I also think that, when my mindset did change, challenges were no longer obstacles. They were rooms. They were room for growth. They were room to use my new tools to show myself I could do it this way instead, this healthier way instead. And it really took me being willing to be vulnerable and frightened. Angry was safe. Angry felt powerful. I was able to be in anger, but to be in vulnerable and fear that was much harder. And it was dropping down into there and being able to be there, instead of having to walk around angry and powerful in that anger, to learn that there's such strength and vulnerability. And once I got through that, once I could really look back and have gratitude for all of it. And I know for so many people, that's like, how could you appreciate all of it? I just can't do that. Saima, you and I have had that conversation. Like, I just can't, which I appreciate, because I need somebody else to hold on to that. Because if I held on to it, I'd still be in that same place I was in my 20s. But all of it has led me to here. All of it has led me to today. All of it has led me to what I'm doing, will do, and have been doing. All of it has made me who I am. And I've finally gotten to a point in my life that I like who I am.
I just want to make a point, Saima, to perhaps clarify what you're saying. Imagine being so angry with somebody, you just want to hit them.
At the world.
But no, just bear with me. At someone that you just want to hit them, but instead of hitting them, you end up hugging them. And this is what's so difficult when you're a victim of this type of PTSD, is you want to hit yourself all the time. You want to lash out all the time instead of hugging yourself and learning to like yourself, if you can get to that place, and ultimately learn how to love yourself. And so kind of counter, as long as you're flailing and you've got, I call it a flamethrower stage, when everyone's standing back from you, and mostly you just want to be loved and know you're not going to be abandoned, and just hugged and say it's going to be okay by somebody, even though that might feel sticky and kind of weird if you've been a bit of a flamethrower for many years. What Nancy, I don't know Nancy from before, of course, but that intimidation thing, it's like they call it the 1,000-year stare. If you went to Vietnam, you come back, you just got that look, because it's like don't mess with me kind of look, because you've been fighting your entire life. And so it's so counter to say, instead of hitting, I'm going to hug you. That's what's going to happen.
But how do you, when you see someone go through and express so much anger, and you're always ready to just fight the world, fight whatever comes your way, and again, there's so much of that in your energy that you just keep attracting this craziness, how do you fight all this negativity? How do you fight it?
I can only tell you specifically about me and Ashok. I know that you can give us a broader view, but for me, it was the moment when I realized how much I was sacrificing by staying in that place. So it was this place of, I was dating a guy that I really cared about, and I was paralyzed. I could not be in this relationship. I so badly wanted to be in the relationship, but I did not know how to be present. I did not know how to be emotionally close with someone and sexually intimate with someone at the same time. Those were two totally separate things, and something I had never integrated. And so the relationship ended up ending painfully for both of us, because we were in love, wanted to be with one another. I wasn't in a place to even explain to him what was going on with me or why I was acting this way. I wasn't there yet. And when I realized how much I was sacrificing by being angry, is when I was like, okay, there's got to be another way. Are you going to go through your whole life this way, sacrificing important things? And yeah, looking real strong like a badass, but
did you have to go through therapy to reach that conclusion? So
well, no.
How do you come to that realization?
Well, the realization was the pain, and the conflict within me was like, I so badly want to be with this guy. Like, this is the first man I'm in love with, and I know that, but I can't get here and here to coordinate. And I was heartbroken of my own doing, and that was profound to me. I think I can't tell you exactly how or why, but in the moment when it happens and you just feel, when you are breaking your own heart to bits, right? There's something that, again, I had to look at and be like, okay, like, I can't endure this. I can't continue to sacrifice this. I won't make it. So, thankfully I had been in therapy since I was 16 years old. I knew when it was time to knock on someone's door. Like, that is the truth. Whether or not I understood exactly why I was showing up, I knew. But in this moment, the realization of what I was sacrificing and the pain I was causing myself, it always had bothered me to cause anyone else pain. That was always a part of my makeup. But I finally was feeling this pain so intensely myself, and I was doing it. I was causing it, was the thought, which isn't the truth in all of it, but it's what got me in the door, right? It was there because of what I had been through, and that I was still using maladaptive strategies to be in the world was what was making it so painful. But nonetheless, it was, again, how do you continue to endure this the rest of your life?
So I think one thing that I definitely want to urge and emphasize here is that for people who are listening to be more receptive to counseling and therapy, because I think this circle on LinkedIn has become very expressive about expressing emotions, but I come across people, especially Ashok, from our part of the world, from the Indian subcontinent, where the concept of therapy, counseling, it just is they ridicule it. They feel that there's no such thing as mental health issues, and until it gets to a point where it's just whoever's experiencing it is just in a really bad place.
Yeah, I think, again, there's so much stigma around. And I think because a lot of the time it's weakness, right? If you're going to therapy, you're weak because you can't handle it on your own. And when you're already feeling that on your own, that you're weak, pathetic, worthless, right? And now the whole world is telling you, yeah, and you need to go talk to someone about this. I think it makes it that much harder.
I will say, as a therapist, though, that there's definitely been a lot of change since I started around people feeling comfortable coming to therapy. I mean, I have a 2-year waiting list, so it's not like I'm waiting for the door to knock and to see people. So there's a huge demand for services now. But I also think I just want to go something that we were just talking a little bit earlier. People who've been traumatized, especially if they've been traumatized as children, they get triggered. They get triggered all the time. And when someone falls in love for the first time, when they've been traumatized, that feeling of falling in love can also be triggering. And a lot of people go through what I call the Houdini phase. And that means that they get into a relationship and they're starting to get trapped in it. And all they want to do is to prove to them they can escape. And if they can escape, then they've got that, yes, I can escape. Even if they're madly in love with this person, they just want a Houdini out of it. And even when they come to therapy, sometimes they want to know they can get out of therapy if they need to. I've had plenty of patients after 5 sessions say, thanks, I feel so much better. I said, what? We just started. And I've learned to go gentle and let them know that they can leave whenever they need. But Nancy, I'd love to know what you think about that.
No, and I think it was, yes, I could get away. I could be in control. I could be in charge. I don't know so much in this relationship, but certainly in situations prior to that, it was Houdini. It was like, watch me disappear. Haha, I'm gone. Like, that's it. This is my specialty. This is my strength. I've got this. And I think in this particular relationship, it just was so much more going into it, and realizing
Of
as I was
course.
becoming an adult and what I really wanted for my life that I was unable to, quote unquote, achieve, right? I wanted to fall in love. I wanted to have a partner. I wanted to build that type of relationship, and I was incapable of doing it in a healthy manner. And I think a lot of people do this too, and I'm sure you deal with it. I think it's important to know you do not have to come. It's a choice. But I think people tend to lie to their therapists, right? We're still afraid that, like they're either going to judge or we're not quite ready to say it out loud. I know that there were weeks that I would go into therapy and be like, I am definitely not saying this. I'm definitely not saying this. I'm definitely not saying this. And I was lucky to work with really skilled people and learned about myself in therapy over the years that all of a sudden shit would be flying out of my face. And I was like, I wasn't going to share that. That was mine. But I also knew I would go into therapists and be able to say, like, this is how I work best. I need to take notes while we're talking. I need you to give me homework and hold me accountable to it. Because otherwise my pattern, which is so easy to do, is to close this all, lock it, put it somewhere where I don't think about it, see it, feel it, nothing until I come back next week and I'm getting nowhere. I learned a bit about what I needed and can walk into a therapist's office and advocate for myself like I would in any other medical professional's office. I tell this story all the time, and I love Jessica Oifer, who's here in Los Angeles, and she's amazing, and I've grown so much from working with her. But this space truly being your own and not about lying, like you say your truth and it's okay. So there was one day during my divorce, I was having a particularly crappy day, and her office happens to be across from a Dunkin' Donuts. So I parked my car, I went in, I grabbed a dozen donuts, and I sat in the waiting room, angry, ready for this. And she opens the door, and I stand up and I say, "You're going to eat these with me, bitch." And she says, "Did you get chocolate?" That's the relationship, right? Because it's not there to judge me. It's not there to take my truth and turn it around. It's to say, hey, safe space, unconditionally accepted in this room. Come walk in, be you, be honest, because this is where all this good is going to happen when we can be in this space. I went to therapy for years and was like, hey, I'm in therapy, I'm doing my job, right? And I would make up crap, and it seemed like it was reason to be there, right? And I could have a conversation about it and have, oh, okay, yeah, well, great, haven't thought about it that way, thank you for, but it wasn't until I really rolled up my sleeves and like lied down and rolled in the mud. Like I got dirty.
I call it getting the whole person in the room. And sometimes you've got someone in front of you and they're just chatting away and being very grateful for the experience. And I'll say, I need the rest of you. And so that there's no rush to that. But you can always feel, or at least I can, when you finally have got the whole person in the room. And that's when that's always an amazing moment. And there's tears for both of us when these kind of things happen and the integration starting to happen. I get my clients to do all kinds of role playing and cushion work and writing letters and that kind of stuff. And the therapy is happening in between the sessions because you're building a relationship. And I always thought, and I wasn't trained this way, but I thought the relationship that you have when you're doing your work with the people that you work with, that in and of itself can be a safe place for that person. And sometimes maybe the first safe place they've ever had.
We've had some
So,
really
sure, a lot of people, a lot of parents might not even recognize that their children might be suffering from PTSD. Are there some signs?
Signs of there's lots of signs of PTSD, but unfortunately, PTSD can look like a lot of other things. It can look like anorexia nervosa. It can look like anxiety. It can look like panic attacks. It can look like depression. It can look like early psychosis. Some people can actually get psychotic. It can look like dissociative disorder because there are dissociative issues that happen with it. The issues, you have to step back from all those symptoms instead of just treating those as individual things with medications and step back, and then you begin to see the story. But the most important diagnostic tool in diagnosing PTSD is asking the person in front of you what's happened, and when you're ready to tell me, I'm here to listen to you without judgment. And in close to 100% of the cases I've been treating over the years, especially with people who've been in therapies or had psychiatric care for years, I just take a history. I just ask them what's happened to them. And I'm very careful about their childhood history. And if people say telltale things like, well, I don't remember much between grade 3 and grade 9, or stuff like that, or yes, there's certain things I forget. So you're looking for that forgetting issue. Or who do you trust? What quality of relationships, depth of relationships. There are lots and lots of clues to someone who, once they're asked the right questions, and I always believe this, if you ask the right question in the right way and look like you actually care about the answer, most people will eventually tell you or try to answer that question to the best of their ability.
And then, Ashok, what's the solution? If you determine that your child is suffering from PTSD, what do you do?
Well, I think Nancy would agree. The universal agreed therapy for PTSD is to get out of the situation that's traumatizing you first off. So you can't help someone who's in a house fire by giving them ointment for their burns. You have to get them out of that burning house. So some people who have PTSD are still in the situation that is causing their PTSD. We don't talk about that much, but that's off. So get the person to a safe place if possible. And sometimes that means calling childhood services on some people, and then developing a stable, safe place, and that would include a stable, safe therapy. And I think those are the cornerstones. And once people begin to feel safe, and begin to believe that there's a safe place they can begin to work through it, then talk therapy, I think, is still the most important way to help someone who's got PTSD of any type.
Did you say talk therapy?
Correct.
And what's that?
Psychotherapy. Talking
to just regular therapy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I know that I benefited a lot from EMDR, and I don't, I know people have tried it and it didn't work, but for me that was helpful because I was very good up here, very good with the logic, and it was connecting back down to the feelings of each. And I'm sure there was some level of avoidance, but it was like I literally didn't have access to it. And so being able to heal by bringing those two things together, right? By being able to, yes, should I track? Was very powerful for me. And discovering where I still had emotions, where I thought I didn't, or finding places where I thought for sure would be triggering and horrific, and they were really okay. But I needed access to both, and that was really big for me. I think there's so much about it we tell people, tell us, let someone know. But as the receivers, we have to be ready for it. And we have to honor our end of the commitment, right? Which is, like Ashok said, I love you, it's going to be okay. Not, oh my, whatever is yours in that moment is yours. And it has to stay yours. And as the people who are out there asking and wanting to help children and people of all ages, truly, who are in these situations, really be ready to receive without judgment, with unconditional love, because I can't think of anything worse than sharing your truth and having the reaction that you've most dreaded become the reality.
Sharing your truth is liberating. It just frees you from all kinds of bondage.
Sharing your truth is liberating. I just want to make a quick point on what EMDR is, in case people don't know. And I actually met Shapiro, who's the person that invented it and started in the early 80s. And she was on a train looking at picket fences and was actually tracking them and was realizing that some of her thoughts. So it's the same idea as getting the whole person in the room. Our brains have left and right places, hemispheres. And so if you give a stimulus while someone is talking about a traumatic memory that is alternating attention in their brain, we get the whole brain into that therapy session, as opposed to a part of it, one side or the other. Because like I said earlier, the tendency in PTSD is to hide parts of the self so you can avoid it. Once you get the whole brain involved, then you're actually getting more of your cognitive mechanisms and your emotional mechanisms in that safe place to be able to describe your story, contain it, understand it emotionally, rather than have emotions that can't contain it. And this is why EMDR works. I do a lot of walking sessions. So sometimes with a client, if you have a client who doesn't want to do the EMDR stuff, you just go for a walk. That's doing the same thing. You're using your left and right feet to walk. People talk way more when they're walking, by the way, than when they're sitting in an office, for example. So I just want to clarify what EMDR was in case people weren't quite sure about that.
Well, and Nancy, you have come a long way. And we're so proud of you.
Thank you.
And I know that it's been amazing, an amazing 2020 for you. And you've literally, you've crossed all these barriers, and you've so much personal growth. Even I think since the time we started our show, and I think, if memory serves me right, didn't we start talking about your journey right here?
Yes, we did. That's what created this regular meeting of the first Tuesday, right? Is we had a conversation that was amazing, and there was more to it, we realized, and there was more value and deeper and different, and we could go in all these different directions with it. And so I am so grateful to you, Saima, because you were the person, or one of the people, who has said to me, like, it's okay, nothing's off limits. It's whatever you want to talk about. Use this space. You're welcome to it anytime you want. Like, that's a gift that, only so many people would give. So thank you.
I mean, it's not just you. This platform has been, for me, my journey, me discovering, my questions, my own soul searching, and I think, I mean, Ashok already is a psychiatrist, but I think, between you and myself, and the journey, and just the growth, and just so much, the knowledge. It's been wonderful.
It's been indescribable and completely unexpected, and it's been beautiful because of it. Yes.
And I think sharing is such a powerful way to make it easier for other people to begin to start. That even happened during our show today.
Right.
So I think sharing is especially for PTSD, is so powerful, and knowing that other people, because that kind of that isolated, alienated feeling that people feel, by sharing, that can be really, really healing for an individual.
I agree.
So I told you guys I'm doing this radio show here, and it has a big listenership. After we've been doing it a few months, so now it's finally catching momentum. And Nancy and Ashok, we get calls from people, and people just literally say thank you, just those two words. Or they'll be like, someone called last week and said that, you have changed 45% of my life so far, and I am changing so much listening to the show. And he said, I'm sure the people who are listening, you don't even realize the amount of lives you are changing. And I just feel that right there is so amazingly powerful. I had someone call, and that person said, you know what, I just want you to know that you're in our prayers. And I was like, oh my gosh, it gives me just goosebumps
Yeah,
to think that I'm in someone's prayers. And I, so yeah, like Brian said, it's impact, and the impact is just phenomenal. And it just
Yeah.
you
We share our stories, and I know you probably feel this way as well. I shared my story with the faith of knowing that it was going to help someone.
Yes.
I never expected to be given the gift and privilege of people actually coming back to me and telling me so.
Yes.
And so that is such a powerful two-way street there. And stories are affirmations, right? The absolutely affirmations of who we are, the lives we live, and how much more similar we are than dissimilar. But again, I started telling my story with the faith of knowing it was helping someone, even if it was just one person. And the fact that people, that's to know without a shadow of a doubt that it's helping someone is, I don't have a word other than privilege. Like, it's a privilege to be doing what I'm doing.
It is. When I started the show, and it was literally the thought that even if I can change just one life, impact one life, and when people come and they share things, I had someone call on the show and said, our children who are growing up here, and they don't know the values that we had. And I was like, okay, you know what, stop right there, because these children of yours that you're referring to, they are American children. So they are not supposed to carry the whole burden of your values, because they're going to be they're just going to be a byproduct, or they're going to whatever it is that they relate to. If you keep shoving things down their throat, they're just going to hate your culture more and more. and they're just going to, just sway away from it.
But I also think it's important to say something else that echoes what we're saying here, is that the more we make talking about childhood trauma and abuse and sexual abuse a conversation that's possible, there's the likelihood that it's going to be more difficult for people to get away with it and contemplate doing it. Because if they know, and I think that if we expose a story, it makes it harder for other people to repeat the same story. And I think it's not just and I think this is gold, that people are able to listen and share. But I'm also comforted by the idea that possibly, just like corporal punishment in schools for kids, that maybe we can have an impact on stopping this once and for all, in time, that is, at least.
Well, and I said, and it was the first time Simon and I were live together, is, I came onto this platform saying, I'm going to be the woman who changes the narrative on sexual abuse. Now, I realize that my voice is meant to do so much more than that. That is one thing that I am here to do. And I would say, and I think you asked me, Saima, like, how do we help our kids? How do we do this? And it was that whole thing. If you have the conversations, and people are terrified to have the conversation because they think it's a sex talk. You're not having a sex talk. You're having a body and boundaries talk. I share all the time when I would bathe my nieces and nephews, I'd always ask, is it okay if I wash your bottom? Is it okay if I wash your vagina? And I asked every time because I wanted them to know they had a choice every time. And they had control over who did or did not touch their body. That was a powerful message in and of itself. Now we have to come back to the adults and, again, be this place when these kids show up, these adults, wherever they are in the process, and hold our end of the bargain of being that space that you can come to.
And ask for permission.
Right. And this, I said to my brother at one point, I'm like, you tell any caregiver that stays with your kids that you talk to your kids about this, and you let them know what your expectation is that if one of our children comes to you, you are going to love them, hug them, hold them, tell them everything's fine. And that's our agreement. We'll come home and have a conversation as a family. But it did two things. It warned the person, if they were someone who would try to victimize a child, that's not going to fly here. And it also said, hey, this is how we expect you to handle it. Because if this were to come up, right, we are the adults in this situation, or we are the receivers. Because sometimes it's adults coming out and telling their story like Denise did for the first time. And you could be 50 years old and feel like that vulnerable 3, 4, 5-year-old in that moment. So it doesn't matter. So us as receivers have to be willing to hear it. And
I think that's imperative.
Yeah. And on both sides, like, we need to have the conversations on both
Especially
sides.
parents. I think parents are the first people to not see this happening to their children. They are also the first people to, if they are told by the child that something is amiss, parents will tell their child to hush.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky I didn't have it. It happens a lot. I think, again, when my trauma didn't just happen to me, it happened to my whole family system at some point when it came out. And I wasn't aware of that when I was going through it because I was just surviving. But the reality is, I know my mom and dad. How did we not see this? How did we miss this? My mom, it's her dad. So everybody was going through their own trauma.
Yeah.
But the more we talk about it, and one of the things I said when I came onto this platform and started talking about this is, I am nearly 50 years old. I was 49 in February. My abuse came out when I was 16 years old. Nothing has changed. There's been no significant shift in the statistics, how comfortable we are talking about it. If we're willing to talk about it, it's still the same taboo. It's still the same hush hush. People will have come around a bit in other areas. You hear someone who attempts to take their life by suicide, and we're like, oh my gosh, I feel for them. It's horrible. Now you bring up sexual abuse, then people go, oh my gosh, I would die if my child told me that. Right? 16. I can't do math, so I'm not even going to try, but the needle has not moved.
So I think maybe what we need to do is when we come and we start our show, we spend 5 minutes sharing statistics about sexual abuse and putting some information out there. If there's a helpline or something, we put it out there, and then we talk about whatever we need to talk about. So as much as I hate to do this, it is
I know,
9:01.
we do it every time.
I hate to end the show, but I have to. So, I'm just going to leave you guys here, and I'm going to just end the show. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, everyone who watches the show, who listens to these courageous stories of everyone pouring their heart out, everyone learning. So thank you, everyone, for being here, and stay safe and stay well. So we're going to end.